Welcome to Real Talk, inside the business of entertainment, where we talk about the current state and future of the entertainment industry with the people who power it. I'm Anne Kennedy McGuire, an entertainment partner at Loeb and Loeb. Today, I'm excited to speak with Ben Riskin, principal at Roomtone, about the rise of video podcasts and why this shift is shaking up traditional content pipelines in entertainment. It is a topic that Ben and I regularly talk and engage on, so we will continue that here. To kick us off, Ben, tell us more about Roomtone, how you got there, your very storied history of the very nascent beginnings of the podcast industry, and what you're doing now.
I run an audio advisory called Roomtone. We launched in 2020. We operate in the professional services side of the audio industry, which also now includes the video industry in part, but business affairs, business development, strategy work. We do some agenting as well. Prior to Roomtone, I led business development and strategy for Endeavor's audio division, as well as for Megaphone, which at the time also included a company called Panoply that doesn't exist anymore. So all of that is to say, I do the deal side of podcasting. And so as video has become more and more prominent in the podcasting ecosystem, we are doing more and more work on that side. My role is a proprietor. I have a business partner, Bianca Grimshaw, and we work closely together, but I run the day-to-day of the business.
Awesome. Thank you. As full disclosure, I did watch an entire presentation yesterday by Cumulus Media on video podcasts to get ready for this. So I have some hot stats to share as well. But first, we have to get your hot take on a topic that's getting buzz in entertainment industry. You promised me big things in this one. I'm excited.
My hot take is that no one's watching video podcasts, that they're listening to video podcasts the same way. We're just distributing them a little differently.
I love it. That's a very good segue into our discussion. But first, we have to start by deciding what an actual video podcast is. What does this mean? What is a video podcast?
All right. The concept of what is a video podcast is, I think, undecided across the industry. I don't know that there's a clear line between a talk show and a video podcast, other than that it's perhaps designed for initial video distribution, and maybe just structure-wise or length-wise or content-wise, it aligns with what people think of as a podcast. There was a time when people were talking about video podcasts as essentially audio podcasts released on video platforms. That is no longer the case, where we're now just producing video first. And so I think it's kind of a blend between a cultural expectation of what's in a podcast and a visual representation of what people think it looks like to make a podcast. But I really personally don't think there's really much of a difference when it comes to what's actually there. And I would say when it comes to the interest of entities looking to acquire and license video podcasts, I don't think that they draw the line very much.
I thought what was interesting was a lot of the industry is going to chat podcasts because, you have more episodes and you can monetize for longer. But when I was listening to this Cumulus Media report yesterday, they were saying that narrative remained more popular. And even when you're audio versus video, there's still a preference for narrative, even though I feel like a lot of the video versions that I watch are the chat version, which I thought was interesting. Have you seen any of that, either that distinction between narrative and chat, or whether that impacts whether they want to do a video versus audio version?
I mean, entirely. I would say what is nice about the rise of video podcasts is that narrative audio and documentary audio has actually been kind of removed from the conversation about podcasting and has become its own separate conversation about series. And for once, people recognize that perhaps the economics, the distribution strategy of video podcasts or chat podcasts is different than that of narrative. I will say, in the past 4 or 5 months, I've been busier than I've been in quite a long time in work on placing narrative podcasts with potential distributors and buyers. And so to me, it's consistent with what we're seeing in the market, which is narrative is often where you get mass media and you get these huge cultural moments. And then video is kind of part of the digital creator universe, where video podcasts become much more like any other social media. And in many ways, I think you get stuff where people are like, oh my God, I love that podcast. But they don't necessarily listen or watch the podcast. They just see the memification of the parts of the podcast. major studios certainly realize the power of narrative audio and perhaps have more realistic understandings of the value drivers for narrative audio and that are less tethered to ad revenue or even intellectual property value. Video podcasting is kind of a different economic altogether, and it's much more about leaning into advertising and traditional digital distribution.
I think it's interesting, and what comes up with our clients a lot is in terms of what video podcast is, and no one's really decided, is that there's a very different price difference between you and me recording
Mhm.
ourselves talking on a microphone in a room or on a Zoom and producing what in the other half of my practice we would consider quality video content, which would be, lighting, sound, scripting, asking questions, significant post-production costs beyond just editing and making the audio sound good. So I think it's interesting because a lot of the deals we've had are like, "Oh, yeah, we'll just do a video version." And we have to stop and say, "What do you mean? Are we just
Yeah.
recording ourselves while we're taping the podcast episodes and no one needs hair and makeup? Or are we doing a real video version that's commercial and marketable?" What have you seen in terms of what people are saying when they're asking for that and what the pushback is?
I mean, there are different types of prices we're paying, right? There's the price around physical production, and then there's also a price when it comes to quality. So it kind of works a couple different ways. When you're producing an audio only podcast, you just are able to make people sound smart in a much easier way. You can remove the ums and ahs, move the conversation in a way that is consistent with the spirit and the factual accuracy of it, but put it in order rather than the way that we think and the way that we talk, which is all over the place. You can't do that in video podcasting, not in the same way, and certainly not with the same grace. And so, interestingly, you're losing kind of the highly edited, incredibly paced conversation that got people into these sort of interview shows, and you're losing the intimacy of the moment, right? There's a real price when it comes to the quality, not even talking about the actual technical specs. And then there's a big price in how video production crews are engaged versus how podcast producers are engaged. Video production crews are engaged on a per diem, and if you don't hold them you lose them. So there's real opportunity costs. You can't say, we've hired this crew and we're going to record 5 days of shooting over 5 months. You need to do your 5 days of shooting in a row. Otherwise, you're paying top dollar. It fundamentally changes how you're making the thing because otherwise you're going to come out of pocket in this huge way to pay video production crews in the manner that they're traditionally paid. Obviously, the actual physical production costs are increased. Even just thinking about storage drives, you really don't need thousands of dollars of thumb drives. You could use a Dropbox account and work very well with your audio product. You can't do that with major video productions or with any significant video production. And then there's the cost of losing future value, which is to say, what if you had sold this as a TV show or a chat show? Like, you have a podcast budget that might be a couple $100,000, and that would have been a multi-million-dollar TV show budget. And so not only are you selling the more boiled down version of it, but you're also shutting off its ability to then be turned into a derivative TV show. I think you can kind of see a couple examples of stuff like this with like Pod Save America, for example, that was able to be optioned and turned into a series, which was essentially just a live version of the show. Now their focus is certainly on YouTube, on video distribution of their podcast, live events. That may be more lucrative. I could not speak to that deal directly, but it's a total strategy shift where one time you might have been making something for a goal of optioning it up into an audiovisual medium, where now you're making something in an audiovisual medium and essentially making it a strategy call around distributing it yourself on something like YouTube and building up a channel, or licensing it to a high bidder like a Netflix or an HBO or Tubi.
I think two things come out of that. One is determining the format for our video podcast depends on what you were talking about in the introduction. Are people actually watching this, or are they minimizing it and just listening to it? And it's interesting because the Humorless Media Study said there's only 25% of people that are only listening to audio without video at all. And then 25% are having the video playing in the background. And then 50% say they're actively watching it. I question how active that is. And I thought it was interesting that Obviously, we all know what's driving a lot of this is that a lot of podcast consumption has gone to YouTube. Since 2019, 15% of people were consuming podcasts on YouTube. Now it's 42%. It's a huge difference on people who are getting their podcasts from YouTube.
And it's not surprising. First, YouTube has always been a very large distributor for certain types of podcasts. And it's not surprising that it's increasing as younger people are getting more into podcasting, because basically you have a generation of people from let's say the term podcast is coined in 2004. You've got a decade before then, before Serial comes out, and also before Apple Podcasts really legitimizes its podcast app and separates it out into its own app that has features in it. Prior to that, you're downloading a podcast and dragging it to your MP3 player, or there were like standalone apps. You have a generation of people who were raised on unique standalone apps, Overcast, Pocket Casts, things like that. The RSS feed as a means of distribution is so archaic. And what you actually can get in a podcast app, and more specifically, the ability to find new content in a podcast app, or to find shows you might like, to even find shows and are currently listening to, is difficult. You're dealing with this archaic distribution system that just buries things over time, right? These kind of linear feeds, or these situations where you have new feeds that are coming out, and so then you have hundreds and hundreds. I mean, I think the last count, it's like 900,000, a million podcasts in Apple Podcasts. You have a more digitally savvy generation that comes up behind and is like, why have a whole separate app to engage with your podcast when you could just stream it on YouTube, where you're streaming everything else, right? So the move to YouTube is not even just generational. It's also something that will likely bring, and we see this with our clients, brings more advertiser confidence, because they trust the metric a bit more. You know, whether or not a view happened is a much cleaner and accepted metric than whether or not a download or listen happened.
I think it's interesting to view YouTube as a solution to the findability problem that we've always had with podcasts in the traditional distribution platforms because of the RSS feed. And that was something they highlighted, because if you start watching a YouTube, on the side panel, they're going to say, you might also be interested in this, this, and this. And they're probably more right than other ways of distribution are in making those recommendations.
Yeah. I mean, it's also that for years, it was so hard to convert a viewer into a listener. It's really hard to get someone who sees something on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook and get them to then go to another app, subscribe to your podcast, and listen to it. There are so many steps. It was commonly accepted that converting a viewer to a listener was like impossible, right? Or it was like a waste of your marketing dollars, and that your marketing dollars should really just be spent on dropping ads into other podcasts, getting existing podcast listeners. And I think that's been turned on its head. And people are absolutely learning about podcasts via social media, via the, memification of chat shows. And suddenly you have visual assets that work for that. And so it's actually amplifying. And then on top of it, those things become their own revenue lines. I mean, YouTube Shorts are a really interesting area for podcasts, given, if you're an hour or 2 hour long chat show, you've probably got some segments. You might have a little challenge. You might have a recurring thing, and then be able to spin those out into shorts, or to take a segment you're doing and turn it into more of a TikTok series. The ability to use it not only as marketing, but also as a new revenue line is really fascinating for a lot of folks. And I think is undermining what was the common knowledge that, a viewer is not a listener.
No, I think that's true. Again, one of the key takeaways from this entire study was that creators who are producing for YouTube should now remind their audiences that they can also listen to their podcasts on Apple and Spotify. And I was like, I guess if you're a native YouTube user and you only watch your podcasts, it would be like a new and exciting thing to get that usual tagline. If they're really minimizing it and not watching the video, then it is a natural conversion to have someone listen to an audio version if they need to get out of the house or away from their YouTube app.
I think when you had that early podcasting, shows owned their own RSS feeds, in part because no one was interested in giving them money to make their show. So they launched it on their own, they built it on their own, but they owned their means of distribution. And that RSS feed was valuable, and you could transfer it from host to host for large MGs against the advertising revenue. I would say over the past 5-10 years, you've seen ownership of the RSS feed become more and more specious, right? Like the older shows have it. You're able to launch the show on your own dime, or if it's celebrity backed, ownership of the feed. But most of the time, that feed is going to be owned by iHeart or Odyssey or whoever paid for the show. And so if you don't have that underlying valuable asset to try to drive people to so that you can build value in it over time and go to shop it for annual distribution deals, then you might as well just put it out everywhere, right? Because you don't own your YouTube channel. I mean, you own it, quote unquote, but like Google owns it. And there was this idea that putting it up on YouTube would cannibalize your RSS audience. And I think now people are like, any audience is valuable.
I think that's right. And a lot of folks do view, like, if I own my YouTube channel, again, Google owns it, but if I control my YouTube channel, then I have another way to monetize. Like you're saying, I can make clips, I can control distribution in that I can at least have sort of a built-in development process if I want to do a longer form show or a longer form television pitch. I have YouTube. It doesn't necessarily cannibalize that, but I agree there's an argument both ways on that front.
Yeah, and you might just focus your efforts on driving audience in different ways or creating new elements to spin out of the podcast rather than driving, all of that aggregating subscribers, right? The messaging used to be rate, review, subscribe, and now it might just be find our TikTok, because if you're making money on all of those different things, then it matters less if you're converting into your RSS feed.
So you're advising your clients who are coming to you either with new podcasts or legacy podcasts. Video is part of every deal we're seeing now from all the major distributors, including the iHearts and the Siriuses, and now Amazon and Netflix getting into video podcasts in a way they really hadn't before. What are you advising your clients on in terms of those deals and also controlling it going forward so that you aren't losing those legacy ownership that you had or the audience that you built up or the IP that you built up in creating these properties?
I think for all of our clients, we start with the question of what is success? What are you trying to build with this project? Is this your marquee project? Are you building your whole business on it? Is this going to be the thing that you're known for? And if so, what you might want to achieve in a deal is very different than something you just kind of came up with over the weekend. They both might be great ideas, but your goals and what is success for you could be different. And so for clients that are looking to build long-term around certain IP, right, we might advise them to launch it independently and then go and find a partner, right? Which not everyone has the ability to do, but it's certainly something that, if you are able to take that risk and build your audience independently, maybe you have the connections to be able to market the project just through your own connections, then that is going to put you in a much stronger position to decide what you want to include in a deal and what you don't. And we've certainly seen this with our clients, but we've seen it in the market generally, where the question over whether or not to convert your independent subscription program into a broader studio subscription, Wondery Plus wants you to bring it into their ecosystem. That decision is a real value question, right? Which is, say, if you have 6 figures or more coming into your subscription, that short-term dollar might be valuable to you, might allow you to take the risks you want to take or hire a new staff. But that long-term value of consistent subscriber base growing over time might actually be the better, more sustainable business choice. And so if it's binge dropped behind a paywall, it really doesn't bother me if it lives there. So we advise our clients depending on what is success for them. For video, we need to be really clear about what constitutes a video recording of the podcast versus a video podcast. There are a lot of issues that come in there. I think where we get a lot of rub is where something has been contracted as an audio project, but given the market is being shifted into video, and then you get kind of pigeonholed into a conversation about money rather than a broader conversation about rights and other elements that might come into place in a video conversation, even including union considerations. But I would say we're very focused on kind of what the client is looking to build in the long term and consequently what they should hold on to. If their plan is to really distribute via YouTube, then maybe they'll want to control and run the YouTube channel, right? Rather than let a partner build that. But if their focus is more on something that they're writing in addition, then they might just say, yeah, let's do it that way. It kind of depends. To your question rather of how we'd advise, I would say, keep an eye out as to each bucket of rights that is in play. Often we might freeze those rights rather than contract around them. For example, I think with a few studios that are really audio focused, a lot of them are essentially freezing video rights, saying, we'll talk about this if and when. Often that's maybe a better solution than contracting around video that might not be made. We are often focused on, if you're going to build something in video, build it independent. And that is better for the show in the long run, better for searchability and marketing. And so if you're going to do that for your show, if you're an always on show, then maybe that's something you want to own and operate rather than having that bundled in with your distributor.
What do you think folks should be taking into account now that Tubi's and the Netflixes, these sort of major streamers that weren't in this space because it was on YouTube, are coming into this space? Do you continue doing your YouTube? Do you do a different version that you're going to Tubi or Netflix with? Or have you had
I think a lot of them are forward looking. This also goes to our first question here about what even constitutes a video podcast, right? Which is to say, a lot of the acquisitions that we're seeing are forward looking. The Tubi deals, Tubi has a whole world of creator-verse content that is being licensed and maybe windowed on Tubi, but is otherwise YouTube content that creators are making. And some of that might be regularly recurring. Maybe there's even some microphones in the shot in some of those. Tubi also has deals where they're creating originals. I think the Audio Chuck deal is an interesting example on that front, where the thing that's going to be created with Tubi is going to be exclusive to Tubi versus windowed there or even non-exclusively just distributed there. So you're seeing across the board all different types of deals. And so what we're talking to a lot of folks about are existing archives. And so the question is, are we able to do a deal around our archive and putting it up there, and it's a licensing deal and we're going to keep making more? So we're talking to folks around that. And I think similarly, if those deals are on the table, what does that mean for the future of your production workflow? How many video podcasts are you currently making? Are they 2 cameras on people's laptop, or do you actually want to shoot this in a set now? I think similarly, we're advising a lot of folks on the difference in distribution regimes. One of the big things is just advertising. Advertising in audio is generally, it's kind of associated with the show. And maybe that association has gotten more diluted as programmatic has come up. But you have this really intimate relationship in headphones with a host. And if you hear an ad suddenly in the show that you don't like, you're like, I am reaching out to this host. I am reviewing it poorly because you kind of are in my head and you weren't invited. We don't really do that around video. We certainly don't do it with like YouTube AdSense. And I think people certainly don't do it on TV. And consequently, how many pharmaceutical drugs do you know that you know business knowing, but you just see those ads all the time? Or political advertising. These are categories that people have the right to and immediately exclude from their podcast advertising ecosystem. You know, you do a deal with iHeart and you say, I don't want guns or tobacco. You have a lot of control over that. You have very little control over that in an environment with a streamer because it's just not the same association. And so a lot of what we're doing too is just talking with people about what they're comfortable with. If you're going to license your video content to, you know, the Roku channel, and there's going to be a bunch of political advertising on it in the next few years, are you okay with that? And so there's a lot of discussion around that. We're advising them on thinking through, if you want to do deals like that, how are you going to? What can you commit to? What is that going to cost? And are you able to recoup that money, or do we need to see it in the front of the deal?
So I think all of that ties into audience maintenance and how are you going to keep and not alienate your audience but while still exploring these new forms of distribution.
It also might strengthen as your content goes in more and more places, your super fans might come together in one place. Your show is now available in all these different places, and you don't want to dilute that like unique kind of unilateral friendship feeling that we have with podcast hosts. And so you find new ways for those people to come in. I love one of the things search engine does is lunches, where if you're a subscriber, you can join them for tacos on Fridays. And I think it's fun for super fans. And I think that's a really smart way to do it.
I like that. All right, we'll move on to our last question, which is, what are the biggest opportunities for innovation you're seeing, given how much the industry and podcasting industry has been changing lately?
It's funny because I'm maybe a bit analog. I think the biggest opportunities that I'm seeing is there's some really interesting opportunities for independent narrative series makers that have come from the rise of video podcasting, which is to say, that as there's more and more of a focus on video podcasting, there's less underqualified people pitching narrative audio. And I think some opening for independence for folks that can actually make the things they're pitching around narrative. And also, I would say around just audio in general. You've actually been able to see experts in the community get opportunities. That's not to say there are a lot of people out of work. There are Pulitzer Prize winning journalists looking for production work. So that's not to say that everything's better, but I would say there's opportunity. And I think that's really interesting. I would say like innovation, I think there are fun ways that the two mediums can learn from each other. Video, I think people view it as surface level. It's a little fun. It's a TikTok video or whatever. And so there's a lot of opportunity to play around with video and segments and visuals. I'm really interested in businesses that are looking at video as a unique revenue and creative line for them. They also are looking at their deals as like a way to make unique segments or shorts or other things that are going to be right for, whatever place those are going to land, TikTok, Reels, YouTube. And those serve their own purposes. Those are looking to build a specific type of audience that may or may not convert over to the full podcast. The hope is to kind of get them into the ecosystem. But to me, that's really innovative. And when it comes to something like sales, I think that's going to be really interesting. I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation we just haven't seen. I mean, I went to Brand Week recently and there was someone talking about, scannable product placement, right? I'm looking at the screen and you just like hold your phone up and it knows the metadata of it or whatever. And so there's some really interesting opportunities there for that 50% of people who are actively watching these podcasts for unique ways to integrate products, to make money via advertising, to create segments that are interesting for sponsors.
I love hearing that there's more of an audience for narrative, that you're seeing more of that lately. That's my personal favorite type of audio. So I love to see that. And obviously that translates really well into video world and hopefully there's more production and, like you said, brand opportunities going forward. All right. Thank you, Ben, for joining us. That's a wrap on this episode of Real Talk Inside the Business of Entertainment. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back soon with more behind the scenes insights and candid conversations with the people shaping the industry. Until next time, thank you for listening.